There have been calls from various groups in many different countries for death and grief to be included in school curriculum for years now. Parents are saying it's a good idea, unsurprisingly. Doctors are saying that it's a must, which is a bit odd. Teachers aren't so thrilled, understandably. Implementing such changes would not be as simple as many people seem to think it would be. And there is still the question of whether it should be done at all. Is it appropriate? This is going to be another very frank video, kind of a behind the scenes of working in death education. Before we begin, we post death and dying related videos every Friday. So if that sounds like your kind of thing, consider subscribing to the channel. Now let's talk, should death be talked about in schools? Education is power. Knowledge is power. On the flip side, death anxiety, denial, and avoidance underpin many societal issues because these feelings promote insecurity about your place in the world. So solid education about the realities of death and dying as a concept for the individual, not just on a societal level, can lead to a big improvement to many societal issues. That is the equation that we're focusing on here. This type of education encourages meaningful living, promotes empathy and compassion, addresses diverse beliefs, increases emotional preparedness and resilience, and reduces fear and anxiety, not just about death itself, but so much more. These are all things that we want for our young people. Many of us can remember incidents during our schooling years where death was present. To use my school years as an example, at age 10, a kid from my school was struck by a car and killed. Everyone was whispering, but no one was addressing it. First year of high school, the mother of a girl in my homeroom class died. Again, a lot of whispering. Third year of high school, a senior student was in a car accident and died. The school did explain it to us at an assembly. The same year, another classmate's stepdad died, and we're back to whispering. The next year, one of our school's librarians lost her battle with cancer. Again, the school addressed it at an assembly. And during my primary school years, a neighbour across the road from us had a heart attack and died, leaving his wife and kids. I also lost 2 grandparents and a great-grandparent who I was close to. Now, this is just the example of my life as one person. Many people will have similar thoughts that come to mind. Yes, I wasn't close to a lot of these people, but the topic of death was all around me no matter what my parents would or would not have liked. That's life. Which is why putting off learning about the realities of death until you're an adult is frankly ridiculous. I had a lot of questions and a lot of concerns and no one was giving me any answers. And for the young people watching this, no, I couldn't have just gone and Googled it. Google didn't exist yet. Yes, I am that old. Think of how Gary feels. My 100% honest answer. I have been asked this question so many times. Should schools be teaching kids about death? And my honest answer is no, in theory. In an ideal world, parents would be talking to their kids about death and dying and grief. In the same way, it should be parents teaching their kids about respecting others, not the school's job. In the same way that parents should be teaching their kids about sex and consent, not the school's job. In the same way that parents should be teaching their kids how to cook and that you don't eat Tide Pods and that social media might not be telling you the truth, not the school's job. But before you say I'm being dramatic, yeah, all those things have been legitimately proposed as being the school's responsibility. My belief is that if you decide to become a parent, it is your job to aim to develop a functional, independent, law-abiding adult. That is your goal. In order to do that, you need to do much more than just put food on the table, a roof over their head, and not to beat them. Death is one of those topics that parents should be starting to talk about with their kids before they even start school. This current evolution of schools being the place that not only teaches kids but parents them as well is absurd. It's not healthy, it's not functional, and it's not sustainable. But in practice, change starts with the youth. Adults now, the generation that are parents now, are not talking to their kids about death. So schools are going to have to step up and raise the kids that are currently in their classrooms to be more death accepting. So when those kids are parents, they will teach their kids, who will go on to teach their kids, etc. I would love that if by the time I reach retirement age, my job as a death educator is no longer required because families are doing it themselves. So to answer the question, should schools be teaching about death? In theory, no. In practice, unfortunately, and probably reluctantly, yes. So how do you implement death education in schools? The Australian school system. Now, I've worked in the Australian and British school systems. They are roughly similar, but for the sake of this video, we'll stick with the Australian system. An Aussie child will typically start kindergarten aged 4 before going into primary school until the age of 11. And from the ages of 12 to 17, sometimes 18, you'll be in high school. They changed the way year groups are made up a few years back. Alternatively, you can choose to go into vocational training at 16. The Australian curriculum goes from year 1 to year 10, then you have your final senior years in year 11 and 12 where, depending on which school you're at, you may complete an international baccalaureate or the individual state's high school certificate program. The Australian curriculum focuses on 8 key learning areas: English, mathematics, science, humanities and social sciences, health and physical education, languages, technology and the arts. And if you're attending a religious-based school, you'll also have religious studies. All of this is to say that there's a lot of learning already stuffed into the Australian curriculum, and finding space for new stuff is extremely difficult. So what do we do? Using the existing curriculum. You can fit the topic of death into any of those 8 key learning areas if you try hard enough. But the areas that it naturally fits into is science, humanities, health and religious studies. But here we come into another problem. Take humanities for example. In years 7 to 10, humanities consists of civics and citizenship, economics and business, geography and history. Now again, I could make death fit into any of those topics, but realistically, you're probably going to only have an opening in the history subject. And from there, we go down the same funnel. I'm usually asked to come in around the time that they're looking at the impact of World War II in Australia. And the impact part of that topic is only really small. But it means I can talk about how World War II made the funeral industry as we know it take off. How mourning traditions changed from being deeply involved in preparing the dead and the rituals that go along with it, to the complete opposite in being death avoidant today. We also look how the medical industry took off with advancements made during the war, but directly resulted in the over-medicalized system and the horrible over-medicalized deaths that we now see so often. And the understanding of that sudden change allows students to understand that the death norms that we have now are changeable and fluid and not all that normal. Another example of including it in the curriculum, and for some reason this really surprises some people, is during religious education. Why, you ask? Because the religious education curriculum is not simply about teaching what the Holy Book says or reciting commandments. It also looks at how religions form morals and ethics and how those things impact societies. Most curriculums will also introduce many other religions as a way of building understanding and compassion. And to the surprise of many, I'm often brought in at this point to talk about voluntary assisted dying and how each religion views that, and how our ethics and morals impact how we view voluntary assisted dying, and the many different viewpoints that a single religion can have on such topic. It gets their students to use their critical thinking skills to analyze different topics and viewpoints. The point being, you find areas of the existing curriculum to teach about death. Because sitting kids down for an assembly with a guest speaker to talk directly about death, frankly, is going to go in one ear and out the other. A one-off talk about something generic such as general grief is not going to cut it. Have you ever spoken to a teenager? A one-off talk like that is the equivalent of parents getting their kids to sit down at the dining room table for the one-off big sex talk. It's pretty much a pointless exercise. However, on the other hand, a one-off talk about death from a non-generic angle, something that will hold their attention, could be very beneficial. Sometimes a sneaky, creative, non-direct approach is your best option. Do other countries have death education in their curriculum? Many countries have the occasional element of death somewhere in their schooling, including in Canada, the UK and Japan. But Taiwan is the only country that has standardized death education in its mainstream schools. And yes, I call it a country. If you don't like that, bite me. Taiwan introduced a fully fleshed out death education segment in its compulsory curriculum in 2000, due to a rise in suicide cases and school violence in the 1980s. Then there was the major earthquake in 1999, where 2,416 people were killed, which was another motivating factor in introducing death education. This was very important because obviously Taiwan has a lot of cultural similarities with China, which has an extremely death-avoidant culture, where it is taboo to even say the word death out loud. So Taiwan wanted to counteract that as well. The Education Department defined this part of the curriculum as life education, saying the consequences of death are felt by the living throughout their lifetime, and it is part of the mainstream curriculum for students from primary 5 to high school. All that is to say, we don't have many curriculum examples that we could borrow from around the world, and Australia does love to wait around for other countries to try things first before really going anywhere near them. If you're enjoying this video, please show us some love and click the like and subscribe buttons. And if you really like it, perhaps share it, perhaps to any teachers that you know. Should boys and girls learn about death differently? So in Australia, like many countries, most of our schools are co-ed, but we do have some, mostly the really expensive ones, that are single sex. And last year, I was asked by a staff member of a single-sex school after a presentation whether death should be taught differently for boys and girls. Which, not gonna lie, took me off guard because death is a universal topic. It will happen to everyone. And I spent months with that question in the back of my head, so here are my thoughts. I could absolutely create presentations and workshops on death, dying, or grief that are designed to focus on the particular death issues that boys or girls face. There is enough difference that could be done, particularly as they get older, and we are very happy to customize our services. But honestly, I don't think it's necessary for under 18s to be educated about death separately because you're educating them for the same reasons. At that age, you are concerned about them engaging in risky behaviour, mental health, and the loss of loved ones, usually grandparents. They all need the same basic death education for those issues. But there are other things that need to be implemented at that age to prevent gender-based issues in death as they get older, whether it's done by schools or parents. And yes, we are talking about toxic masculinity and gender-based roles. You all know what we're talking about it. We've talked about it in many other videos. The challenges of death education in schools. There are two things I commonly come up against when engaging with schools. Firstly is time. There's only so much time in their timetable and calendar. They are already doing so much. And secondly is fear. The staff's own fear of confronting death, but more so the school's fear of upsetting parents. Anyone who has ever worked in schools knows that there are always a couple of parents per year group who seem to love to give the staff a hard time, to put it mildly. And as a service provider, I know that the backlash is going to be directed towards school staff, not me, and that's not a good feeling. And yes, it is hypocritical of these parents to refuse to talk about a critical issue with their kids at home and then get upset when someone else does it for them, but that's the world we live in. It is also the reason we don't talk about death from a religious angle. We tell students whatever you believe happens to your soul, aura, spirit is between you and whatever God you believe in. We're just here to talk about the physical body. Because you can be the same religion as someone and have a completely different view on something. What you say in one Catholic school, you can't say in another Catholic school. What you say in one Islamic school, you can't say in another Islamic school. So we just stick to the facts. It makes it a lot harder for parents to argue with you. But to be honest, I think some of them just get a kick out of arguing anyway. Putting death education in schools has its pros and cons, just like every other topic. You will never please everyone. We customise our workshops to cater to schools' needs, whether that be that they include us regularly in their curriculum or as a once-off during crisis. We cater to different religions, cultures, ages, and socioeconomic groups because while the basics are the same for everyone, the day-to-day reality can be very different. Like many countries, there has been a push in Australia for a complete curriculum overhaul, and if that happens, we have advocates already there waiting to get death education into the curriculum. So what do you think about all this? Should schools be responsible for teaching death education, or should it be the parents' job? Let us know in the comments. And with that, go talk death.